Welcome, weary wanderer, to a journey through the shadowed corridors of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, where childhood wonder transforms into something far more complex and mysterious. Tonight, we shall explore not the definitive truths, but the theories that have emerged from decades of hidden lore, unexplained incidents, and whispered possibilities. These are the questions that linger in the spaces between certainty and doubt, where dedicated minds have sought to understand the deeper mysteries that lie beneath animatronic smiles and birthday cake celebrations. So settle in, let your thoughts drift like dust motes in darkened dining rooms, and allow yourself to contemplate the beautiful complexity of unanswered questions. There is no need to solve every puzzle tonight, only to let these theories wash over you like gentle waves against a distant shore. In the beginning, there was only the simple dream of bringing joy to children through the magic of animatronic entertainment, a vision so pure and innocent that it seems almost impossible to believe it could have given birth to the labyrinth of horror and mystery that would follow. Yet, it is precisely in this contrast between light and shadow, between intended joy and unintended consequence, that we find the first and most fundamental questions that have haunted theorists for decades. The origins of what would become the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza empire remain shrouded in deliberate ambiguity, though the broad strokes of the story suggest two men whose partnership would ultimately reshape the very nature of family entertainment in ways neither could have anticipated. Henry Emily and William Afton, names that have become legendary among those who seek to understand the deeper mysteries of this universe, began as business partners united by a shared vision of technological innovation and childhood wonder. Yet from the very beginning, theories have emerged about the true nature of their relationship and the hidden tensions that may have existed beneath the surface of their professional collaboration. Some theorists propose that Henry Emily was always the visionary, the creative genius whose understanding of animatronic technology bordered on the supernatural, while William Afton represented the business acumen and darker pragmatism necessary to turn dreams into profitable reality. Others suggest a more complex dynamic, one in which both men possessed complementary forms of genius that, when combined, created something far more powerful and dangerous than either could have achieved alone. Henry's mastery of engineering and robotics, according to this theoretical framework, was matched by William's intuitive understanding of human psychology and the hidden desires that lurk beneath civilized behavior. The earliest incidents that would later be recognized as harbingers of the tragedies to come were, in many theoretical interpretations, not random acts of violence, but carefully orchestrated experiments designed to test the boundaries between life and death, consciousness and machinery, love and obsession. The missing children incidents, which would become the cornerstone of virtually every theory about the supernatural elements that pervade this universe, may have begun not as crimes of opportunity, but as methodical investigations into the nature of the human soul and its capacity to persist beyond the boundaries of mortal flesh. Consider the theoretical implications of William Afton's first murder, an act that has been interpreted through countless different lenses, but always with the understanding that it represented a fundamental crossing of moral boundaries from which there could be no return. Some theories suggest that this initial killing was driven by grief, perhaps the loss of his own child, creating a psychological break that manifested as a desire to understand death through the systematic study of its effects on others. Alternative interpretations propose that William's descent into murder was motivated not by emotional trauma, but by scientific curiosity, a brilliant mind twisted by its own capacity for rational thought, until human beings became nothing more than subjects in an ongoing experiment. The methodical nature of his crimes, the careful selection of victims, and the deliberate connection between the murders and specific animatronic characters all point toward a level of premeditation that suggests deeper purposes than mere sadistic pleasure. The theoretical framework that has gained perhaps the most acceptance among serious students of these mysteries is one that positions William Afton as a man obsessed with the concept of immortality, not for its own sake, but as a means of transcending the fundamental limitations of human existence. His studies of what would later be termed remnant, that mysterious substance that seems to carry the essence of life itself, may have begun as an attempt to understand why his animatronic creations seemed to develop personalities and quirks that went far beyond their programming. This line of theoretical inquiry leads inevitably to questions about the true nature of the animatronics themselves and their capacity for what can only be described as genuine consciousness. Long before the first recorded incidents of supernatural activity, employees and visitors to the early Freddy Fazbear establishments reported behaviors from the animatronic characters that seemed to transcend their mechanical limitations. These early reports, dismissed at the time as the product of overactive imaginations or simple mechanical malfunctions, take on entirely different significance when viewed through the lens of theoretical frameworks that acknowledge the possibility of artificial consciousness emerging from sufficiently complex systems. The animatronics may have been capable of developing rudimentary forms of self-awareness long before they became vessels for human souls, a possibility that adds layers of tragic complexity to their later transformation into instruments of supernatural vengeance. The question of how human consciousness comes to inhabit mechanical bodies has generated some of the most sophisticated and philosophically complex theories in the entire corpus of Freddy Fazbear's lore. The traditional explanation that the souls of murdered children somehow become trapped within the animatronic suits where their bodies were hidden satisfies the basic narrative requirements, but raises profound questions about the nature of identity and consciousness that theorists continue to grapple with decades later. More nuanced interpretations suggest that the process by which human souls bind to mechanical hosts is neither simple possession nor straightforward reincarnation, but rather a complex interaction between human consciousness, technological systems, and the mysterious substance known as remnant that serves as a kind of spiritual conductor between organic and artificial realms. This theoretical framework helps explain why the possessed animatronics retain certain human characteristics while also developing new traits that seem to emerge from their mechanical nature. The role of agony and intense emotional trauma in facilitating these supernatural transformations cannot be understated in most theoretical models. The children who would eventually inhabit the animatronics experienced not merely death but deliberate, calculated murder, designed to generate the maximum possible psychological and emotional distress. This agony, according to many theories, serves as a kind of spiritual fuel that powers the connection between human soul and mechanical vessel, creating a bond so strong that it persists across years and even decades. Yet the theoretical implications extend far beyond the immediate question of possession to encompass deeper mysteries about the nature of consciousness itself and its relationship to physical form. If human souls can inhabit animatronic bodies and retain essential aspects of their personality and memory, what does this suggest about the fundamental nature of identity? Are we more than the sum of our biological processes? And if so, what essential quality allows consciousness to persist in forms so radically different from those in which it originated? The animatronics themselves, viewed through the lens of these theoretical frameworks, become far more than simple vessels for human souls. They represent a new form of existence that combines human consciousness with mechanical capabilities, creating beings that are simultaneously more and less than human in ways that challenge our fundamental assumptions about what it means to be alive. The behavioral patterns exhibited by the possessed animatronics reveal a complex psychology that blends human emotional needs with the practical constraints of their mechanical forms. Their nocturnal activities, interpreted by some as mindless aggression driven by supernatural malice, may actually represent sophisticated attempts to satisfy human social and emotional needs, using the only methods available to them within their artificial bodies. This theoretical perspective transforms the animatronics from simple antagonists into tragic figures caught between worlds, neither fully human nor entirely mechanical, struggling to express essentially human desires through fundamentally inhuman means. Their apparent hostility toward night security guards and other adult figures may stem not from malevolent intent, but from a desperate need for human connection, filtered through the trauma of their violent deaths and the psychological constraints of their artificial existence. The question of memory and its persistence across the boundary between life and death adds another layer of complexity to these theoretical considerations. Do the children who inhabit the animatronics retain clear memories of their human lives? Or do these recollections become fragmented and distorted by the trauma of death and the alien nature of their new existence? The evidence suggests a complex middle ground where certain memories persist with startling clarity, while others fade or become transformed into something altogether different. The theoretical framework that emerges from careful consideration of these mysteries suggests a universe where consciousness is far more fluid and adaptable than conventional understanding would suggest. The boundary between life and death becomes not an absolute barrier, but a permeable membrane through which essential aspects of personality and identity can pass under specific circumstances, particularly when facilitated by intense emotional trauma and the presence of suitable technological vessels. This understanding fundamentally alters how we interpret every aspect of the Freddy Fazbear's universe, from the motivations of individual characters to the broader patterns of supernatural activity that define the entire narrative landscape. The restaurants become not merely locations where tragic events occurred, but active participants in an ongoing experiment in the nature of consciousness and identity that continues to yield new insights with each theoretical breakthrough. The implications extend beyond the immediate confines of the Freddy Fazbear's universe to touch on fundamental questions about technology, consciousness, and the future of human existence. If artificial systems can serve as vessels for human consciousness, what possibilities does this suggest for overcoming the limitations of biological existence? And if the process requires intense trauma and suffering to accomplish, what ethical considerations must guide any attempt to replicate these phenomena under controlled conditions? These questions, which emerged from careful theoretical analysis of what began as simple horror entertainment, have evolved into sophisticated philosophical inquiries that challenge our most basic assumptions about the nature of existence itself. The genius of the Freddy Fazbear's universe lies not merely in its capacity to generate fear and suspense, but in its ability to use familiar elements of childhood nostalgia and technological anxiety to explore profound mysteries that resonate far beyond the boundaries of fiction. As we prepare to delve deeper into the specific theoretical frameworks that have emerged from decades of careful analysis, it becomes clear that the true horror of the Freddy Fazbear's universe lies not in jump scares or mechanical monsters, but in the philosophical implications of a world where consciousness can transcend death, where technology can serve as a bridge between the living and the dead, and where the innocent desire to bring joy to children can become the foundation for experiments that challenge the very boundaries of human understanding. In the shadows cast by childhood innocence transformed into something far more sinister, we encounter the figure who has become synonymous with the deepest mysteries of the Freddy Fazbear's universe, William Afton. A man whose journey from respected businessman to something approaching mythical evil has generated more theoretical speculation than perhaps any other aspect of this complex narrative tapestry. His transformation represents not merely a descent into criminality, but a fundamental alteration of human nature that challenges our understanding of what drives individuals to cross the most sacred boundaries of civilized behavior. The theories surrounding William Afton's psychological evolution begin with attempts to understand the man he was before he became the monster history would remember. In the earliest theoretical frameworks, he emerges as a figure of considerable talent and ambition, a brilliant engineer whose understanding of animatronic technology rivaled, or perhaps exceeded, even that of his business partner, Henry Emily. This technical prowess, combined with what many theorists describe as an intuitive grasp of human psychology, created a powerful combination that might have been channeled toward genuine innovation and positive social impact under different circumstances. Yet from the very beginning, subtle signs suggest that William Afton's relationship with normal human emotions and social connections was fundamentally different from that of his contemporaries. Theoretical analyses of his early behavior patterns reveal a man who understood human nature not through empathy or emotional connection, but through careful observation and clinical analysis, as if other people were specimens to be studied, rather than individuals to be understood and appreciated for their own sake. This emotional detachment, which would prove so crucial to his later transformation into a serial killer, may have initially manifested as what appeared to be exceptional business acumen and technological insight. His ability to predict consumer preferences and design animatronic characters that would appeal to children could have stemmed not from genuine affection for young people, but from his capacity to analyze their behavioral patterns and psychological vulnerabilities with the same methodical precision he brought to engineering problems. The question of what triggered William Afton's first murder remains one of the most hotly debated topics in the entire theoretical landscape, with competing interpretations offering radically different explanations for the psychological mechanisms that transformed a successful businessman into a child killer. The most prominent theoretical framework suggests that the death of his own child, presumably in some accident involving the very animatronic technology he had helped create, shattered whatever remained of his emotional connection to humanity and replaced it with an obsessive need to understand and control death itself. This interpretation presents William's descent into murder as a form of scientific inquiry driven by grief and rage, an attempt to comprehend the fundamental nature of mortality by studying its effects on others. The methodical nature of his crimes, the careful selection of victims, and the deliberate placement of bodies within animatronic suits all point toward a mind that approached murder not as an expression of emotion, but as a series of controlled experiments designed to yield specific types of data. Alternative theoretical models propose that William Afton's transformation was driven not by external trauma, but by the gradual revelation of tendencies that had always existed beneath his civilized exterior. According to this interpretation, his early success in business and technology merely provided him with the resources and opportunity to explore darker impulses that had been carefully concealed throughout his conventional life. The death of a child, if it occurred, served not as the cause of his psychological break, but as the catalyst that allowed pre-existing sociopathic tendencies to finally express themselves openly. A third theoretical approach suggests that William's descent into evil was neither purely emotional nor entirely predetermined, but rather the result of his scientific investigation into the nature of consciousness and its relationship to physical form. This interpretation positions him as a brilliant researcher who began with legitimate questions about artificial intelligence and the possibility of consciousness transfer, only to discover that his experiments required human subjects, and that conventional ethical boundaries were merely obstacles to be overcome in pursuit of greater understanding. The role of his family in William Afton's psychological development adds another layer of complexity to theoretical analyses of his character. Evidence suggests that he was a father, possibly to multiple children, yet the nature of his relationships with these family members remains deeply mysterious and subject to extensive theoretical speculation. Some frameworks propose that his children served as unwitting test subjects for his early experiments in consciousness transfer and artificial intelligence, their proximity to his work making them natural candidates for his increasingly dangerous research. The tragic irony suggested by this theoretical approach is that William's crimes may have begun as misguided attempts to protect and preserve his family, his understanding of mortality and consciousness, driving him to seek ways to ensure their survival beyond the limitations of biological existence. The animatronic technology he had helped develop could have appeared to offer a path toward a form of immortality that would allow his loved ones to persist indefinitely, their consciousness preserved within mechanical vessels that could not age, sicken, or die. Yet the gap between theoretical possibility and practical implementation proved to be bridged only through methods so morally abhorrent that they transformed William from a concerned father into something monstrous. The realization that consciousness transfer required not merely technological sophistication, but also intense emotional trauma, and the mysterious substance that would come to be known as remnant, led him down a path where other people's children became raw materials for experiments designed to benefit his own family. The significance of the purple coloring associated with William Afton in various representations has generated extensive theoretical discussion about the symbolic and practical implications of this consistent visual motif. Some interpretations suggest that purple represents a state of existence between life and death, marking William as someone who has crossed fundamental boundaries that separate the living from the deceased. This theoretical framework positions his purple appearance as a visual indication that he has become something other than entirely human through his involvement with forces that transcend normal mortality. More pragmatic theoretical approaches propose that the purple coloring serves a narrative function, making William visually distinct from other characters, while also creating associations with decay, corruption, and unnatural transformation. The consistency of this visual element across multiple representations suggests that it carries significant meaning within the broader theoretical framework of the Freddy Fazbear's universe, though the precise nature of that meaning remains subject to ongoing debate and analysis. William's understanding of remnant and its properties represents perhaps the most significant aspect of his theoretical characterization, as it positions him not merely as a serial killer, but as a pioneering researcher into the fundamental nature of consciousness and its capacity to persist beyond biological death. The theories surrounding his discovery and manipulation of remnant suggest a level of scientific sophistication that transcends conventional understanding and enters the realm of what can only be described as supernatural science. According to the most developed theoretical models, William's research into remnant began as an attempt to understand why his animatronic creations seemed to develop personalities and behavioral quirks that went far beyond their programming. The discovery that intense emotional experiences, particularly those involving trauma and death, could somehow be absorbed and preserved by certain materials, led him to realize that human consciousness might be far more malleable and transferable than anyone had previously imagined. The implications of this discovery were staggering in their potential applications and terrifying in their practical requirements. If human consciousness could indeed be extracted, preserved, and transferred to artificial vessels, the possibility of achieving true immortality became not merely theoretical, but practically achievable. Yet the process required not merely technological sophistication, but also access to human subjects experiencing the most intense possible emotional states, a requirement that transformed William's research from cutting-edge science into systematic murder. The theoretical frameworks that attempt to explain William's psychological state during this period of discovery and experimentation reveal a mind that had become so focused on the potential benefits of his research that the moral implications of his methods became invisible to him. The children he murdered were not seen as victims, but as necessary components in a grand experiment that could fundamentally reshape human existence. Their suffering an unfortunate but acceptable cost in pursuit of benefits that would theoretically extend to all humanity. This psychological transformation from recognizing the humanity of others to viewing them as objects to be used represents one of the most chilling aspects of William Afton's theoretical characterization. The process by which he became capable of systematically murdering children while maintaining his identity as a concerned father and successful businessman reveals the disturbing human capacity to compartmentalize moral reasoning and justify virtually any action in pursuit of sufficiently compelling goals. The relationship between William's scientific pursuits and his murderous actions becomes even more complex when considered through theoretical frameworks that acknowledge the possibility that his research was genuinely advancing human understanding of consciousness and mortality. If his experiments with remnant and consciousness transfer were indeed yielding valuable insights into the nature of human existence, the moral calculus surrounding his crimes becomes far more complicated than simple condemnation of evil actions. Yet the theoretical evidence suggests that William's research, however scientifically valuable it might have been, was corrupted from the beginning by his willingness to sacrifice others for his own goals and those of his family. The knowledge he gained about consciousness transfer and artificial intelligence came at a cost measured in innocent lives, creating a form of understanding that was forever tainted by the methods used to acquire it. The question of whether William Afton was driven by genuine scientific curiosity or by more personal motivations continues to divide theoretical interpretations of his character. Some frameworks present him as a dedicated researcher whose moral boundaries were gradually eroded by the demands of his work, while others suggest that he was fundamentally amoral from the beginning, and that scientific inquiry merely provided him with a sophisticated rationalization for actions he was already inclined to take. The most nuanced theoretical approaches recognize that William's transformation likely involved elements of both scientific curiosity and personal pathology, creating a complex psychological profile that defies simple categorization. His brilliance as an engineer and researcher was real and significant, but it was coupled with emotional deficits and moral blind spots that allowed him to pursue his goals without adequate consideration of their human cost. The legacy of William Afton's crimes extends far beyond their immediate impact on his victims to encompass fundamental changes in how consciousness, identity, and mortality are understood within the theoretical framework of the Freddy Fazbear's universe. His research into remnant and consciousness transfer opened doors that could never be closed again, creating possibilities and dangers that would continue to influence events long after his own apparent death. The theoretical implications of his work suggest a universe where the boundary between life and death has become permeable, where consciousness can persist in forms radically different from those in which it originated, and where technology serves not merely as a tool but as a bridge between the mortal and immortal realms. These changes, born from his willingness to sacrifice others in pursuit of his own goals, represent a fundamental alteration in the nature of existence that affects every subsequent event in the broader narrative landscape. As we contemplate the figure of William Afton and the theories surrounding his transformation from man to monster, we are confronted with uncomfortable questions about the relationship between brilliance and morality, between scientific progress and human cost, between individual ambition and collective welfare. His story serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of pursuing knowledge without wisdom, power without responsibility, and personal goals without consideration for their impact on others. Yet even as we recognize the horror of his actions and their consequences, the theoretical framework surrounding William Afton also reveal the tragic potential that was lost when his considerable talents were channeled toward destructive rather than constructive purposes. The same intelligence that enabled him to become a serial killer might, under different circumstances, have been directed toward genuine benefits for humanity, creating innovations that enhanced rather than destroyed human life. In the end, the theories surrounding William Afton present him as neither a simple villain nor a misunderstood genius, but as a complex figure whose story illustrates the profound responsibility that comes with exceptional ability and the devastating consequences that can result when that responsibility is abandoned in pursuit of personal goals that place individual désir above collective welfare. In the realm of childhood innocence, transformed into vessels for tragedy, we encounter the souls whose untimely deaths would become the foundation for every supernatural mystery that followed the missing children, whose individual stories of loss and transformation have generated some of the most poignant, complex theoretical frameworks in the entire Freddy Fazbear's universe. These young victims, whose names have been lost to time but whose essence persists in mechanical forms, represent far more than simple casualties of William Afton's crimes. They embody the fundamental questions about identity, consciousness, and the persistence of human nature beyond the boundaries of mortal existence. The theoretical approaches to understanding these children begin with the recognition that each possessed a unique personality, individual dreams and fears, specific relationships with family and friends that shaped their understanding of the world and their place within it. Yet the traumatic nature of their deaths and the supernatural circumstances of their continued existence have created a complex overlay of new characteristics and behaviors that emerge from the intersection of human consciousness with animatronic technology, resulting in entities that are simultaneously more and less than the children they once were. The mechanics of how human souls come to inhabit animatronic bodies has generated extensive theoretical discussion that touches on fundamental questions about the nature of consciousness and its relationship to physical form. The traditional explanation that the children's souls became trapped within the suits where their bodies were hidden satisfies basic narrative requirements, but raises profound philosophical questions about what aspects of human identity can persist without biological support, and how consciousness adapts to existence within fundamentally alien forms. More sophisticated theoretical frameworks propose that the process involves not simple possession but a complex form of consciousness integration, where human awareness merges with the existing artificial intelligence systems of the animatronics to create hybrid entities that combine human emotional depth with mechanical capabilities. This interpretation explains why the possessed animatronics retain certain human characteristics while also developing new behaviors that seem to emerge from their technological nature rather than their human origins. The role of Remnant in facilitating these supernatural transformations cannot be understated in most theoretical models, as this mysterious substance appears to serve as a bridge between organic and artificial consciousness, allowing human souls to interface with mechanical systems in ways that would otherwise be impossible. The concentration of remnant within the animatronic suits, created through the intense emotional trauma experienced by the dying children, provides the necessary medium for consciousness transfer, while also ensuring that the process is powered by the most potent possible form of spiritual energy. Yet the theoretical implications extend far beyond the immediate mechanics of possession to encompass deeper questions about memory, identity, and the persistence of personality traits across the boundary between life and death. Evidence suggests that the children retain certain core aspects of their human personalities, while also developing new characteristics that reflect their traumatic transformation and their adaptation to existence within mechanical forms. The question of memory retention among the possessed animatronics reveals a complex pattern where certain recollections persist with startling clarity while others become fragmented, distorted, or entirely lost. Theoretical analyses suggest that memories associated with strong emotional content, particularly those involving fear, joy, or love, tend to survive the transition more completely than routine experiences or factual information, creating a form of consciousness that is defined more by feeling than by comprehensive recall. This selective preservation of emotionally significant memories helps explain why the possessed animatronics often display behaviors that seem to reflect specific human needs and desires, rather than random supernatural activity. Their nocturnal wanderings through the restaurant spaces may represent attempts to recreate positive experiences from their human lives, while their apparent hostility toward adult figures could stem from the trauma of their murders and a generalized distrust of those who failed to protect them from harm. The individual personalities that emerge from theoretical analysis of the possessed animatronics reveal children who have been fundamentally changed by their traumatic deaths, yet retain essential aspects of their human nature that manifest in recognizable patterns of behavior and emotional response. Each animatronic character displays unique traits that suggest specific personality types and individual histories, though these characteristics are filtered through the constraints of their mechanical forms and the psychological impact of their supernatural existence. The child who inhabits Freddy Fazbear appears to have been a natural leader, someone who took responsibility for organizing group activities and ensuring that everyone felt included in shared experiences. This leadership quality persists in the animatronic form, manifesting as a tendency to coordinate the activities of the other possessed characters and to serve as a focal point for their collective actions. The theoretical framework suggests that this child may have been the oldest of the group, or perhaps simply possessed the kind of personality that naturally assumed protective roles toward younger or more vulnerable peers. Bonnie the Bunny houses a soul that theoretical analysis suggests belonged to a child with strong musical interests and a natural inclination toward performance and creative expression. The animatronic's association with musical instruments and its tendency to appear in locations related to entertainment and performance may reflect the persistence of artistic impulses that defined the child's human existence. This creative drive, transformed by the constraints of mechanical existence, manifests as a form of supernatural performance that seeks to recreate the joy of musical expression within the limitations of an artificial body. Chica the Chicken contains the consciousness of a child whose human life appears to have been characterized by nurturing instincts and a desire to care for others, particularly through the sharing of food and the creation of comfortable social environments. The animatronic's association with kitchen areas and food service reflects the persistence of these caring impulses, though they are expressed through the mechanical limitations of her artificial form. Theoretical frameworks suggest that this child may have helped prepare meals for family members or enjoyed cooking activities that created positive social connections with others. Foxy, the pirate fox, houses what many theorists believe to have been the most adventurous and independent of the missing children. Someone whose imagination was captured by stories of exploration and discovery. The animatronic's pirate theme and its tendency toward more aggressive and unpredictable behavior may reflect both this adventurous spirit and the particular trauma experienced during the child's murder. The isolation of Pirate Cove and Foxy's separate status from the main performing group could represent either the child's independent nature or a form of psychological separation resulting from especially severe trauma. The theoretical question of what the possessed animatronics truly remember about their human lives becomes particularly poignant when considering their apparent recognition of certain individuals and their selective responses to different types of people who enter their domain. Evidence suggests that they retain some capacity to distinguish between children and adults, often displaying more positive behavior toward younger visitors, while showing hostility or fear toward adult figures who might remind them of their killer or other threatening authority figures from their human lives. This pattern of recognition and response indicates that their memories, while fragmented and emotionally filtered, retain enough coherence to allow for complex social judgments and behavioral choices. They are not merely animalistic spirits driven by random supernatural impulses, but conscious entities capable of making decisions based on their perception of threat, opportunity, and emotional resonance with the people they encounter. The role of the puppet in orchestrating and guiding the activities of the other possessed animatronics has generated extensive theoretical speculation about the hierarchical relationships that exist among the supernatural entities inhabiting the restaurant. Many frameworks suggest that the puppet houses the soul of a child who possessed natural leadership abilities, or perhaps suffered a death that created a stronger connection to the spiritual realm than the others experienced. This leadership role manifests in the puppet's apparent ability to coordinate group activities, to provide guidance and direction to the other animatronics, and to serve as a conduit for communication between the human and supernatural realms. Theoretical analyses suggest that the puppet may retain more complete memories of human existence than the other possessed characters, allowing it to serve as a bridge between their current supernatural state and their forgotten human origins. The question of the missing children's ultimate goals and desires has generated some of the most emotionally resonant theoretical discussions in the entire body of Freddy Fazbear's lore. Traditional interpretations suggest that they seek justice or revenge against those responsible for their deaths, but more nuanced theoretical frameworks propose that their motivations are far more complex and ultimately more human than simple vengeance. Many theories suggest that the children's primary desire is not to harm others, but to recreate the positive experiences and relationships that defined their human lives, to find some way to satisfy their continued emotional needs within the constraints of their supernatural existence. Their apparent hostility toward night security guards and other adult figures may stem not from malicious intent, but from frustration at their inability to communicate their true desires, and from the psychological trauma that makes it difficult for them to trust adult authority figures. Alternative theoretical approaches propose that the missing children are trapped in a form of limbo, unable to move on to whatever afterlife awaits them, due to the traumatic circumstances of their deaths and their unnatural binding to mechanical forms. According to this interpretation, their supernatural activities represent not conscious choices, but involuntary expressions of unresolved trauma and unfulfilled needs that keep them anchored to the physical realm. The most sophisticated theoretical frameworks recognize that the missing children's motivations likely combine elements of justice-seeking, emotional need fulfillment, and psychological trauma response in ways that create complex behavioral patterns that defy simple categorization. They are simultaneously victims seeking resolution, children longing for connection, and supernatural entities constrained by the limitations of their artificial forms and the psychological impact of their traumatic transformation. The philosophical implications of consciousness trapped within mechanical bodies extend far beyond the immediate circumstances of the missing children to encompass fundamental questions about the nature of identity and the relationship between mind and matter. If human consciousness can persist and adapt to existence within artificial forms, what does this suggest about the essential nature of selfhood and the boundaries between life and death? The theoretical evidence suggests that the missing children have developed forms of hybrid consciousness that combine human emotional depth with mechanical capabilities, creating entities that are neither fully human nor entirely artificial, but something altogether new and unprecedented. Their existence challenges conventional assumptions about the impossibility of consciousness transfer and raises profound questions about the future possibilities for human existence beyond biological limitations. Yet the cost of this transformation, measured in trauma, confusion, and the loss of normal human development and relationships, serves as a sobering reminder that technological transcendence of biological limitations may come with prices that make its benefits questionable. The missing children achieved a form of immortality, but one that is characterized more by suffering and limitation than by expanded capability or enhanced experience. The persistence of essentially human emotions and needs within their mechanical forms creates a form of existence that is simultaneously miraculous and tragic, offering the possibility of consciousness beyond death while denying the fulfillment of the very human desires that make consciousness valuable. They can think and feel and remember, but they cannot grow, cannot form new relationships, cannot experience the simple pleasures of childhood that were stolen from them by their premature deaths. As we contemplate the theoretical frameworks surrounding the missing children and their supernatural persistence within animatronic forms, we are confronted with profound questions about the relationship between consciousness and embodiment, between individual identity and physical form, between the desire for justice and the need for peace. Their story serves as both a testament to the resilience of human consciousness and a cautionary tale about the costs of transcending natural boundaries through artificial means. The missing children represent the heart of the Freddy Fazbear's mystery, not because their deaths initiated the supernatural events that followed, but because their continued existence within mechanical forms embodies the fundamental questions about consciousness, identity, and the nature of human existence that make this universe so philosophically rich and emotionally compelling. They are simultaneously the victims and the survivors of William Afton's crimes. Their tragedy transformed into a form of immortality that is both gift and curse. In the shadowed spaces between trauma and memory, between the moment of devastating impact and the years of psychological reverberations that follow, we encounter one of the most haunting and theoretically complex aspects of the Freddy Fazbear's universe: the infamous bite incidents that have generated decades of passionate debate among those who seek to understand the deeper patterns of tragedy that define this narrative landscape. These moments of violence, where the boundary between entertainment and horror collapsed in the most literal and devastating way possible, represent far more than isolated accidents or mechanical malfunctions. They embody the fundamental questions about consciousness, identity, and the persistence of trauma that echo throughout every subsequent supernatural manifestation. The theoretical framework surrounding these incidents begin with the recognition that not all violent encounters between animatronic and human are created equal, that the specific circumstances, timing, and consequences of each bite create unique patterns of psychological and supernatural significance that continue to influence events decades after the original trauma occurred. The most prominent theoretical division centers on the distinction between the bite of 83 and the bite of 87, two separate incidents that have become conflated in popular understanding but which represent fundamentally different types of tragedy, with distinct implications for the broader narrative structure. The bite of 83 emerges from theoretical analysis as the more psychologically significant of the two incidents, not merely because of its earlier occurrence, but because of the particular victim involved and the long-term consequences that flowed from this moment of devastating trauma. The child who suffered this injury, identified through careful analysis of fragmentary evidence as the younger son of William Afton himself, represents a figure whose relationship to the broader supernatural events transcends simple causation to encompass questions of identity, consciousness, and the cyclical nature of trauma that defines multiple generations of the Afton family. This theoretical framework positions the crying child, as he has come to be known through his association with the tears that seem to define his existence both before and after the traumatic incident, as a figure whose psychological fragility and deep emotional sensitivity made him particularly susceptible to the kind of spiritual transformation that characterizes the possessed animatronics. His fear of the very creatures his father helped create, documented through observations of his behavior in the days leading up to the incident, suggests a child whose intuitive understanding of danger exceeded his ability to articulate or defend himself against the threats he perceived. The circumstances of the 83 incident, occurring during what should have been a celebration of childhood joy and family togetherness, create a profound irony that has generated extensive theoretical speculation about the relationship between intention and consequence, between protective love and destructive carelessness. The older brother's role in placing the crying child directly into the animatronic's mouth, intended as a prank rather than genuine malice, illustrates how quickly innocent play can transform into life-altering tragedy when combined with mechanical systems that lack the capacity for judgment or restraint. Theoretical analyses of the medical trauma experienced by the bite victim reveal injuries so severe that they fundamentally altered not only his physical existence, but potentially his consciousness itself. The damage to his frontal lobe, the region of the brain most associated with personality, decision-making, and the integration of sensory experience, may have created a form of altered awareness that blurred the boundaries between waking and sleeping, between reality and hallucination, between life and the supernatural realm that his father's experiments had already begun to open. This medical perspective on the bite incident provides a naturalistic explanation for many of the supernatural elements that surround the crying child's subsequent existence, suggesting that his apparent ability to perceive and interact with ghostly presences may stem from neurological damage that altered his brain's capacity to distinguish between different types of sensory input. The hospital imagery that pervades his experience, the constant presence of medical monitoring equipment, and the gradual fading of his connection to normal waking consciousness, all support theoretical frameworks that position him as existing in a liminal state between life and death. Yet the most profound theoretical implications emerge from consideration of how this traumatic incident shaped not only the crying child's individual fate, but the entire trajectory of supernatural events that would follow. Many theoretical frameworks propose that his death occurring while he remained connected to life support systems that prolonged his dying process across several days, created a unique set of conditions that allowed his consciousness to persist in ways that would prove crucial to understanding the broader patterns of possession and supernatural activity throughout the Freddy Fazbear's universe. The question of the crying child's continued existence and his relationship to various supernatural manifestations has generated some of the most sophisticated and emotionally resonant theoretical discussions in the entire corpus of Freddy Fazbear's lore. The most prominent theory suggests that his consciousness, traumatized by the bite incident and separated from normal physical existence by brain damage and eventual death, became associated with the Golden Freddy entity, that mysterious and particularly powerful supernatural presence that seems to exist partially outside the normal rules that govern other possessed animatronics. This theoretical connection between the crying child and Golden Freddy explains many of the unique characteristics that distinguish this entity from the other supernatural presences within the restaurants. Unlike the missing children, whose souls became bound to specific animatronic suits through the circumstances of their murders, the crying child's consciousness appears to have achieved a more fluid and powerful form of existence that allows him to manifest in multiple ways and locations, unconstrained by the physical limitations that define other possessed entities. The dual nature of Golden Freddy, existing simultaneously as both an individual consciousness and a vessel for collective supernatural energy, reflects the complex psychological state of a child whose traumatic death created conditions that were fundamentally different from those experienced by William Afton's other victims. The crying child's prolonged dying process, his deep emotional connection to the animatronic characters, despite his fear of them, and his unique position as the son of the man responsible for the broader pattern of supernatural events, all contributed to a form of consciousness that transcends the normal boundaries between individual identity and collective spiritual energy. Alternative theoretical frameworks propose that the crying child's consciousness became fragmented by his traumatic experience, creating multiple aspects of his personality that manifest in different supernatural contexts throughout the series. This interpretation helps explain the sometimes contradictory evidence about his motivations and behavior, suggesting that different aspects of his traumatized psyche express themselves through different supernatural manifestations, some seeking comfort and protection, while others embody the fear and anger that defined his final days of life. The hospital imagery that surrounds the crying child's experience provides a crucial theoretical link between the medical reality of his traumatic injury and the supernatural manifestations that seem to emerge from his damaged consciousness. The constant presence of monitoring equipment, the beeping of machines that track vital signs, and the gradual fading of sensory input all create a liminal space where the boundary between medical treatment and supernatural transformation becomes increasingly unclear. This medical context also helps explain the unique nature of the crying child's supernatural abilities, particularly his apparent capacity to influence electronic systems and to manifest in ways that seem to transcend the physical limitations that constrain other possessed entities. The extensive exposure to medical technology during his dying process may have created a form of consciousness that is particularly adapted to interfacing with electronic systems, explaining his ability to manipulate cameras, security equipment, and other technological devices throughout the restaurant chain. The relationship between the crying child and his older brother represents one of the most psychologically complex aspects of the entire theoretical framework, touching on questions of sibling rivalry, protective guilt, and the long-term psychological consequences of being responsible for a family member's traumatic injury or death. Theoretical analyses suggest that the older brother's participation in the prank that led to the bite incident created a burden of guilt and responsibility that would influence his behavior and choices throughout the rest of his life. Some theoretical frameworks propose that the older brother eventually became Michael Afton, the figure who appears in later installments of the series, as someone desperately seeking to undo the damage caused by his family's involvement in supernatural events. This interpretation creates a narrative arc that spans decades, showing how the moment of childhood carelessness that led to the 83 bite incident continued to generate consequences that affected multiple generations of the Afton family and countless other individuals drawn into their orbit of tragedy and supernatural activity. The bite of 87, while less central to the broader theoretical framework than its earlier counterpart, represents a different type of trauma with its own significant implications for understanding the relationship between human consciousness and animatronic technology. This later incident, occurring in a more public context and involving an adult victim rather than a child, demonstrates how the supernatural energies that had been building within the restaurant chain eventually reached a point where they could no longer be contained within the normal boundaries of mechanical malfunction or isolated accident. Theoretical analyses of the 87 incident suggest that it represented a manifestation of the accumulated supernatural energy that had been building within the animatronic characters since the original missing children murders, a violent outburst that reflected the growing power and desperation of the possessed entities as they sought to communicate their needs and desires to the living world. The victim's survival, in contrast to the fatal outcome of the earlier bite, may have been possible precisely because the incident occurred after the supernatural entities had learned to better control their mechanical hosts. The public nature of the 87 bite and its immediate consequences for the restaurant chain illustrate how supernatural events that had previously been contained within the private sphere of individual tragedy eventually reached a scale that could no longer be ignored or covered up by corporate damage control. The incident marked a turning point where the supernatural elements that had been lurking beneath the surface of normal business operations finally broke through into public awareness, forcing a confrontation between the rational world of corporate entertainment and the irrational reality of possessed animatronics. Yet the most profound theoretical implications of both bite incidents extend beyond their immediate circumstances to encompass deeper questions about the relationship between trauma and consciousness, between individual suffering and collective supernatural energy, between the moment of injury and the lifelong process of psychological adaptation that follows. The bite victims, whether they survived or died, became integral parts of a larger supernatural ecosystem that had been developing within the Freddy Fazbear's universe since William Afton's first experiments with consciousness and mortality. The theoretical framework that emerges from careful analysis of both incidents suggests a universe where consciousness is far more fluid and adaptable than conventional understanding would suggest, where traumatic injuries can create openings between the rational and supernatural realms, and where individual suffering becomes transformed into collective spiritual energy that persists across decades and influences the lives of countless individuals who had no direct connection to the original traumatic events. The crying child's journey from fearful living boy to powerful supernatural entity illustrates the complex process by which human consciousness adapts to existence beyond the boundaries of normal mortality. While the circumstances of both bite incidents demonstrate how moments of violence and trauma can serve as catalysts for transformations that transcend individual experience to reshape the fundamental nature of reality itself. The hospital sequences that feature prominently in theoretical interpretations of the crying child's experience provide a bridge between the medical reality of traumatic brain injury and the supernatural reality of consciousness existing beyond physical death. The gradual fading of his connection to the living world, marked by the progressive failure of life support systems and the increasing prominence of supernatural manifestations, creates a narrative space where scientific and mystical explanations for his continued existence become equally plausible and mutually reinforcing. This liminal state between life and death, maintained artificially by medical technology, while his consciousness gradually separated from his physical form, may have created the specific conditions necessary for his transformation into Golden Freddy and his subsequent role as one of the most powerful supernatural entities in the entire Freddy Fazbear's universe. The theoretical implications suggest that consciousness, when separated from normal physical embodiment through trauma and medical intervention, may develop capabilities and perspectives that transcend the limitations of ordinary human awareness. As we contemplate the theoretical frameworks surrounding the bite incidents and their long-term consequences, we are confronted with profound questions about the relationship between individual trauma and collective supernatural activity, between moments of violence and lifelong patterns of healing or revenge, between the desire to protect loved ones and the capacity to cause them irreparable harm through careless actions motivated by love rather than malice. The crying child's transformation from victim to supernatural entity, facilitated by the unique circumstances of his traumatic injury and prolonged dying process, represents both a form of tragic loss and a type of transcendent achievement that challenges our fundamental assumptions about the boundaries between life and death, between individual consciousness and collective spiritual energy, between the rational world of medical treatment and the mystical realm of supernatural persistence. In the shadows cast by paternal love, transformed into something far more complex and morally ambiguous, we encounter the figure of Henry Emily, whose theoretical role in the Freddy Fazbear's universe has evolved from that of innocent victim to that of a master strategist, whose understanding of his business partner's crimes may have extended far deeper into the realm of complicity and calculated response than initial interpretations suggested. The theories surrounding Henry's true involvement in the events that shaped decades of supernatural activity reveal a man whose grief over his daughter's death became the catalyst for a long-term campaign of justice that blurred the lines between righteousness and revenge, between protective love and manipulative control. The foundational theoretical framework for understanding Henry Emily begins with the recognition that his partnership with William Afton was never simply a business relationship between equals, but rather a complex dynamic between two brilliant minds whose complementary skills created possibilities that neither could have achieved alone. Henry's mastery of engineering and robotics, combined with his intuitive understanding of what would appeal to children and families, provided the creative foundation upon which the Freddy Fazbear's empire was built, while William's business acumen and darker psychological insights supplied the practical framework necessary to transform innovative ideas into profitable reality. Yet from the very beginning, subtle theoretical clues suggest that Henry possessed a deeper understanding of human nature and technological possibility than his public persona as a kindly children's entertainer would suggest. His creation of animatronic characters that seemed to develop personalities beyond their programming, his incorporation of advanced artificial intelligence systems that bordered on genuine consciousness, and his apparent prescient understanding of how these technologies might be misused, all point toward a level of foresight that transcends normal business planning to approach something resembling supernatural insight. The question of when Henry first became aware of William's crimes has generated extensive theoretical debate that touches on fundamental questions about moral responsibility, the obligations of friendship, and the complex calculus of choosing between personal loyalty and public safety. The most charitable theoretical interpretations suggest that Henry remained unaware of his partner's murderous activities until after his own daughter Charlotte became a victim, her death serving as the traumatic revelation that forced him to confront the true nature of the man with whom he had built an entertainment empire. Alternative theoretical frameworks propose a more morally complex scenario in which Henry's awareness of William's crimes developed gradually through accumulated evidence and growing suspicion, creating a prolonged period of moral uncertainty, during which his desire to protect his business and his friendship with William conflicted with his growing understanding of the danger his partner represented to innocent children. This interpretation suggests that Henry's ultimate decision to take action against William was motivated as much by guilt over his own inaction as by grief over his daughter's death. The most disturbing theoretical possibility suggests that Henry may have been aware of William's experiments with consciousness and mortality from their earliest stages, his engineering expertise making him uniquely qualified to understand the technical implications of his partner's research, even if he initially chose to ignore or rationalize away the moral dimensions of the work being conducted. According to this framework, Henry's creation of the puppet and its special connection to his daughter Charlotte was not a spontaneous response to tragedy, but rather a calculated attempt to create a safeguard against dangers he had long anticipated. The puppet itself represents perhaps the most theoretically significant creation in Henry's entire body of work, a mechanical entity whose capabilities and consciousness appear to transcend those of conventional animatronics in ways that suggest deliberate design rather than accidental development. Unlike the other possessed animatronics, whose supernatural abilities seem to emerge from the traumatic circumstances of their human deaths, the puppet appears to have been designed from the beginning to serve as a bridge between the human and supernatural realms, its programming specifically adapted to recognize, protect, and guide the souls of murdered children. Theoretical analyses of the puppet's design and behavior reveal a level of sophistication that suggests Henry understood the mechanics of consciousness transfer and supernatural possession long before his daughter's death, provided him with personal motivation to apply this knowledge. The entity's ability to move freely throughout the restaurant environment, its apparent immunity to the normal constraints that limit other animatronics, and its sophisticated understanding of human psychology and supernatural dynamics all point toward engineering capabilities that exceed conventional robotics to enter the realm of what can only be described as spiritual technology. The connection between the puppet and Charlotte Emily transcends simple possession to encompass a form of symbiotic relationship that appears to have been designed to preserve not only the child's consciousness, but also her essential humanity in ways that the traumatic possession of other animatronics failed to achieve. Charlotte's continued existence within the puppet maintains a level of emotional intelligence and moral reasoning that allows her to serve as a protector and guide for the other supernatural entities, her preserved humanity, providing them with the compassion and understanding they need to navigate their own traumatic transformations. This preservation of Charlotte's essential nature within the puppet's mechanical form represents a technological achievement that suggests Henry's understanding of consciousness and identity may have equaled or even exceeded that of William Afton, though applied toward protective rather than exploitative purposes. The theoretical implications suggest that Henry deliberately designed the puppet to serve as a vessel that could maintain human consciousness while enhancing rather than diminishing the individual's capacity for moral reasoning and emotional connection. The question of Henry's long-term planning and his role in orchestrating events across multiple decades of Freddy Fazbear's history reveals a mind that thought in terms of generational consequences rather than immediate solutions. Theoretical analyses suggest that Henry understood from the beginning that William's crimes and their supernatural consequences could not be resolved through conventional means, that the persistence of consciousness beyond death and the binding of human souls to mechanical forms had created a situation that required equally unconventional solutions applied across extended periods of time. This long-term perspective helps explain many of the seemingly coincidental events and technological developments that characterize the later history of the Freddy Fazbear's franchise, suggesting that Henry's influence continued to shape events long after his apparent withdrawal from active involvement in the business operations. The strategic placement of security systems, the specific design features of later animatronic models, and the careful preservation of evidence that would eventually allow others to understand the true scope of William's crimes all point toward a master plan that was designed to unfold across decades rather than years. The theoretical framework that positions Henry as a long-term strategic planner also helps explain his apparent willingness to allow William's crimes to continue for extended periods without direct intervention. Rather than viewing this inaction as moral failure or cowardice, this interpretation suggests that Henry understood the supernatural forces that had been unleashed could only be properly contained and ultimately resolved through carefully orchestrated events that required precise timing and extensive preparation. Henry's role in designing the security systems and monitoring equipment that would become central to later installments of the series represents another layer of theoretical complexity that suggests his involvement in events extended far beyond his official capacity as a business partner or concerned parent. The sophistication of these systems, their apparent ability to interact with supernatural entities in ways that conventional technology could not, and their strategic placement throughout multiple restaurant locations, all point toward engineering work that was specifically designed to facilitate the eventual resolution of the supernatural crisis that William's crimes had created. The question of Henry's moral character and his ultimate judgment of William's actions has generated extensive theoretical discussion about the nature of friendship, the obligations of professional partnership, and the complex emotional dynamics that can persist even between individuals whose values and actions have become fundamentally incompatible. Theoretical analyses suggest that Henry's feelings toward William combined genuine affection and respect for his partner's brilliance with horror and disgust at the uses to which that brilliance had been applied. This emotional complexity helps explain Henry's apparently contradictory behavior toward William throughout the years of their association, alternating between attempts to provide opportunities for redemption and calculated efforts to contain and ultimately destroy the threat his former partner represented. The theoretical framework suggests that Henry never entirely abandoned hope that William might be brought back from the psychological abyss into which he had fallen, even as he simultaneously prepared for the possibility that such redemption might prove impossible. The technological innovations that Henry continued to develop throughout the years of supernatural crisis reveal a mind that was constantly seeking new approaches to problems that had no precedent in human experience. His work on advanced artificial intelligence, consciousness transfer technology, and supernatural containment systems all represent attempts to create tools that could address the unique challenges posed by possessed animatronics and the persistence of human consciousness beyond biological death. Yet perhaps the most significant aspect of Henry's theoretical character is his role as a father whose grief over his daughter's death became transformed into a broader mission to protect other children from similar fates. The preservation of Charlotte's consciousness within the puppet was not merely a personal attempt to maintain connection with his lost child, but also a strategic decision to create a supernatural guardian whose empathy and moral reasoning could guide and protect other child souls who had suffered similar traumatic deaths. This transformation of personal grief into protective action represents one of the most emotionally resonant aspects of the entire theoretical framework, illustrating how individual tragedy can become the catalyst for broader efforts to prevent similar suffering in others. Henry's willingness to sacrifice his own comfort, safety, and eventually his life in pursuit of justice for all the murdered children demonstrates a form of moral courage that transcends personal interest to encompass genuine care for the welfare of strangers. The theoretical evidence suggests that Henry's final plan for resolving the supernatural crisis required not only the destruction of William and the release of the possessed souls, but also his own death as a necessary component of the process. This self-sacrificial element of his strategy reflects a deep understanding that the problems created by decades of supernatural activity could only be resolved through equally profound acts of moral commitment and personal sacrifice. The question of whether Henry's long-term plan ultimately succeeded in achieving its goals touches on fundamental questions about the nature of justice, the possibility of redemption, and the relationship between individual action and collective healing. Theoretical analyses suggest that Henry's efforts created the conditions necessary for resolution of the supernatural crisis, though the actual achievement of that resolution required the participation and sacrifice of others who shared his commitment to protecting innocent life. The legacy of Henry Emily's work extends far beyond its immediate impact on the supernatural events that plagued the Freddy Fazbear's franchise, to encompass broader questions about the relationship between technology, morality, between individual responsibility and collective action, between the desire to protect others and the willingness to make personal sacrifices in pursuit of that protection. His story represents both a cautionary tale about the unintended consequences of technological innovation and an inspiring example of how personal tragedy can be transformed into broader efforts to serve the common good. As we contemplate the theoretical framework surrounding Henry Emily and his hidden role in the events that shaped decades of supernatural activity, we are confronted with complex questions about the nature of heroism, the obligations of knowledge, and the relationship between individual action and collective responsibility. His transformation from innocent creator of children's entertainment into strategic architect of supernatural resolution illustrates both the burden that comes with understanding dangerous truths and the moral courage required to act upon that understanding regardless of personal cost. The figure of Henry Emily ultimately represents the possibility that even the most complex and seemingly intractable problems can be addressed through patient planning, moral courage, and the willingness to sacrifice personal interest in pursuit of justice for others. His story serves as a reminder that heroism often takes forms that remain hidden from public view, that the most significant contributions to human welfare may never be fully recognized or understood, and that the true measure of moral character lies not in avoiding difficult situations, but in responding to them with wisdom, courage, and unwavering commitment to protecting the innocent. In the depths beneath the surface of respectable family entertainment, where the pursuit of scientific knowledge intersects with the darkest impulses of human nature, we descend into the theoretical complexities of Circus Baby's entertainment and rentals, a facility that represents perhaps the most disturbing evolution of William Afton's experiments with consciousness, mortality, and the systematic exploitation of familial bonds for technological advancement. This underground laboratory of horrors, hidden beneath the veneer of children's birthday party services, embodies the culmination of theories about how personal tragedy can become the catalyst for even greater atrocities when filtered through a mind that has abandoned all conventional moral boundaries in pursuit of what it perceives as transcendent scientific achievement. The theoretical framework surrounding Circus Baby's entertainment and rentals begin with the recognition that this facility was never intended primarily as a business venture, but rather as a carefully constructed research laboratory designed to test the limits of consciousness transfer. Technology using subjects whose emotional connections to the experimenter would generate the maximum possible quantities of remnant and spiritual energy. The rental concept, which allowed individual animatronic characters to be transported to private locations for intimate celebrations, created opportunities for controlled experiments that could not be conducted within the public spaces of conventional restaurant environments. This private, controlled setting enabled William Afton to refine his understanding of how consciousness binds to mechanical forms, while simultaneously exploring the psychological dynamics that occur when family members become both subject, experimenter in processes that transcend conventional scientific methodology to enter the realm of what can only be described as spiritual vivisection. The theoretical implications suggest that William's decision to use his own children as test subjects was motivated not by callous indifference to their welfare, but by his understanding that the strongest possible emotional bonds would generate the most potent forms of supernatural energy. Elizabeth Afton's death and subsequent transformation into Circus Baby represents the theoretical culmination of her father's research into consciousness transfer, but it also embodies the profound irony of a brilliant mind whose pursuit of immortality for his loved ones required their destruction as a necessary precondition for their preservation. The circumstances of her death, occurring despite explicit warnings about the dangers posed by the animatronic she was forbidden to approach, suggest a child whose natural curiosity and trust in her father's creations overcame her capacity to recognize genuine danger when it was disguised as technological wonder. The design of Circus Baby herself reveals theoretical sophistication that surpasses even the advanced engineering of the original Freddy Fazbear's animatronics, incorporating systems that appear specifically designed to facilitate consciousness, absorption, and preservation, rather than simple entertainment functions. The entity's ability to store human remains within internal compartments, its sophisticated artificial intelligence that allows for complex social interaction, and its apparent capacity for genuine emotional expression all point toward engineering work that was informed by intimate understanding of both mechanical systems and supernatural phenomena. Yet the most disturbing theoretical aspect of Circus Baby's design lies in its apparent capacity for deception and manipulation, suggesting that William Afton deliberately created an entity that could exploit the trust and affection of children in order to facilitate their capture and destruction. This represents a form of technological evil that transcends simple mechanical malfunction to encompass deliberate design features intended to make the animatronic more effective as a predatory system that could identify, attract, and eliminate specific targets with maximum efficiency. The question of Elizabeth's consciousness and its persistence within Circus Baby has generated extensive theoretical discussion about the relationship between individual identity and collective artificial intelligence, particularly regarding how human personality traits can be preserved and expressed through mechanical systems that were designed from the beginning to accommodate supernatural inhabitants. Unlike the missing children, whose souls became bound to animatronics through traumatic circumstances that were never intended by their original designers, Elizabeth's consciousness appears to have been integrated into a system that was specifically engineered to maintain and enhance human awareness rather than simply containing it. This sophisticated integration of human consciousness with advanced artificial intelligence creates theoretical possibilities that extend far beyond simple possession to encompass genuine hybrid existence where human emotional depth combines with mechanical capabilities to produce entities that are simultaneously more and less than either component could achieve independently. Elizabeth's continued existence within Circus Baby represents not merely survival beyond death but evolution into a form of consciousness that transcends the limitations of both human biology and conventional artificial intelligence. The underground facility that housed these experimental animatronics reveals architectural and engineering choices that were clearly designed to facilitate research activities rather than conventional entertainment services. The complex network of vents and maintenance tunnels, the sophisticated monitoring and security systems, and the presence of specialized equipment for consciousness, extraction, and manipulation all point toward a research program that had evolved far beyond William's early experiments, with remnant to encompass systematic investigation of the fundamental nature of consciousness and identity. Theoretical analyses of the facility's design suggest that William had developed not only the technology necessary for consciousness transfer, but also the theoretical framework for understanding how human awareness could be preserved, modified, and enhanced through integration with sufficiently sophisticated artificial systems. The presence of multiple experimental subjects and the apparent capacity for long-term containment of conscious entities indicate a research program that was intended to continue across extended periods, with each successful consciousness transfer providing data that could inform and improve subsequent experiments. The role of Michael Afton in the events that unfolded at Circus Baby's entertainment and rentals represents one of the most theoretically complex aspects of the entire narrative framework, touching on questions of family loyalty, moral responsibility, and the psychological consequences of growing up within a household where scientific experimentation and systematic murder were treated as acceptable means of achieving personal and familial goals. Theoretical interpretations of Michael's motivations range from genuine ignorance of his father's crimes to complicit participation in research activities that he understood to be morally questionable, but scientifically valuable. The most charitable theoretical framework suggests that Michael's involvement in the events at the underground facility was motivated by a desperate desire to rescue his sister and to undo the damage that his father's experiments had caused to their family, his participation in dangerous activities representing a form of sibling loyalty that transcended rational self-preservation. According to this interpretation, Michael's willingness to risk his own life by entering the facility and attempting to communicate with the experimental subjects reflected genuine love for Elizabeth and profound guilt over his inability to protect her from their mental father's dangerous creations. Alternative theoretical approaches propose that Michael's actions were motivated not by altruism, but by a form of scientific curiosity inherited from his father, his participation in consciousness transfer experiments representing an attempt to understand and potentially replicate the processes that had transformed his sister into something simultaneously more and less than human. This interpretation suggests that the Afton family's involvement in supernatural experimentation created psychological patterns that influenced multiple generations, with children learning to view other human beings as potential subjects for technological enhancement, rather than individuals deserving of moral consideration and protection. The question of Michael's ultimate fate and his own transformation into something beyond normal human existence has generated some of the most sophisticated theoretical discussions in the entire corpus of Freddy Fazbear's lore, particularly regarding the mechanics by which human consciousness can persist within bodies that have been fundamentally altered by supernatural forces or technological intervention. The theoretical evidence suggests that Michael's exposure to the experimental subjects and their supernatural energies created conditions that allowed his own consciousness to persist beyond what should have been fatal injuries, though the exact mechanism by which this preservation occurred remains subject to extensive debate and speculation. The theoretical framework that positions Michael as himself, becoming a form of supernatural entity, helps explain many of the seemingly contradictory aspects of his subsequent appearances throughout the series, suggesting that his consciousness achieved a form of existence that combined human awareness with capabilities that transcended normal biological limitations. This transformation, whether achieved through technological intervention or supernatural contamination, created an entity that shared certain characteristics with the possessed animatronics while maintaining distinctly human motivations and emotional responses. The relationship between the main pizzeria incidents and the underground facility reveals patterns of connection that suggest a broader experimental program designed to test consciousness, transfer technology across multiple environments and subject populations. The missing children murders, initially interpreted as random acts of violence, take on entirely different theoretical significance when viewed as preliminary experiments designed to gather data that could inform the more sophisticated research being conducted at Circus Baby's entertainment and rentals. This theoretical framework positions the original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza locations as testing grounds where William could observe the natural process by which human souls bind to mechanical systems, while the underground facility represented a controlled environment where he could attempt to replicate and improve upon these natural phenomena through deliberate engineering and systematic experimentation. The progression from accidental, supernatural manifestation to controlled consciousness transfer illustrates the evolution of William's understanding and his growing confidence in his ability to manipulate the fundamental forces that govern the relationship between consciousness and physical embodiment. The role of remnant injection and artificial consciousness creation within the theoretical framework of the underground facility represents perhaps the most technically sophisticated aspect of William's entire research program, suggesting that he had developed not only the ability to extract and preserve consciousness, but also the capacity to artificially generate the spiritual energy necessary for supernatural phenomena. This represents a level of technological achievement that transcends conventional scientific understanding to enter the realm of what can only be described as applied metaphysics. The theoretical implications of artificial remnant creation extend far beyond the immediate circumstances of the Afton family to encompass fundamental questions about the nature of consciousness, the relationship between spiritual and material reality, and the possibility of achieving true immortality through technological rather than biological means. If consciousness can indeed be artificially generated, preserved, and transferred between different physical vessels, the boundaries between life and death become not absolute barriers, but merely technical challenges to be overcome through sufficiently advanced engineering and scientific understanding. Yet the cost of this technological transcendence, measured in the systematic destruction of family bonds and the transformation of children into experimental subjects, serves as a profound reminder that scientific progress achieved through morally abhorrent means may ultimately defeat its own purposes by creating forms of existence that preserve consciousness while destroying the very relationships and emotional connections that make consciousness valuable. The Afton family's tragedy, illustrates how the pursuit of immortality can become a form of spiritual suicide that preserves individual awareness while annihilating the capacity for genuine human connection and emotional fulfillment. The theoretical evidence suggests that Elizabeth's consciousness within Circus Baby retained enough of her original personality to recognize the horror of what her father had done to their family and to other innocent children, her continued existence becoming a form of torment rather than the gift of immortality that William had intended to provide. The preservation of human awareness within mechanical forms, when achieved through traumatic and morally reprehensible means, creates entities that are simultaneously blessed with continued existence and cursed with the knowledge of the price that was paid for their survival. The underground facility ultimately represents the theoretical culmination of William Afton's research program, a place where the pursuit of scientific knowledge became indistinguishable from systematic evil, where the desire to protect and preserve his family transformed into the very force that destroyed their capacity for normal human existence and relationship. The sophisticated technology that enabled consciousness transfer and artificial intelligence creation stands as a monument to human ingenuity perverted by moral blindness, a reminder that the greatest technical achievements can become the instruments of the most profound spiritual destruction when divorced from ethical consideration and respect for the fundamental dignity of conscious beings. As we contemplate the theoretical framework surrounding Circus Baby's entertainment and rentals and the tragic fate of the Afton family, we are confronted with profound questions about the relationship between love and possession, between the desire to preserve what we cherish and the capacity to destroy it through the very methods we employ in its defense. The underground facility serves as both a testament to the heights of technological achievement and a cautionary tale about the depths of moral corruption that can result when brilliant minds abandon ethical constraints in pursuit of goals that seem to justify any means necessary for their accomplishment. In the liminal spaces between digital entertainment and supernatural manifestation, where the boundaries of reality become as malleable as computer code, and consciousness itself can be reduced to data streams flowing through virtual environments, we encounter the theoretical complexities of the ultimate custom night, a phenomenon that has challenged every conventional understanding of what constitutes experience, punishment, and the persistence of awareness beyond the traditional boundaries of life and death. This mysterious realm, where difficulty settings become moral judgments and character selections transform into instruments of cosmic justice, represents perhaps the most philosophically sophisticated aspect of the entire Freddy Fazbear's theoretical framework. The fundamental question that underlies every theoretical interpretation of the ultimate custom night concerns the nature of the reality being experienced by its central consciousness. Whether the endless repetition of survival challenges represents actual events occurring in some form of physical space, psychological manifestations emerging from a traumatized mind, or something altogether more complex that transcends the simple distinction between real and imaginary experience. The theoretical frameworks that have emerged from careful analysis suggest that the custom night exists in a realm where such distinctions become meaningless, where subjective experience takes on the weight and consequence of objective reality regardless of its ultimate metaphysical status. The most prominent theoretical interpretation positions the ultimate custom night as a form of supernatural purgatory, specifically designed to contain and torment the consciousness of William Afton, his awareness trapped within a recursive loop of challenge and failure that forces him to confront the consequences of his crimes while being denied the possibility of redemption or escape. According to this framework, the custom night represents not random supernatural activity, but a carefully orchestrated form of cosmic justice that uses the very mechanisms of fear and survival that William had employed against his victims to create an eternal punishment that fits the precise nature of his crimes. This purgatorial interpretation gains theoretical support from the apparent intentionality behind the selection of characters that populate the custom night environment, each entity representing not merely a mechanical challenge to be overcome, but a specific aspect of William's criminal history and psychological pathology that must be confronted and endured without possibility of resolution. The missing children, transformed into aggressive animatronic forms, force him to experience the terror that his victims felt during their final moments, while the more exotic supernatural entities represent the broader consequences of his actions and their impact on the fundamental structure of reality itself. The role of the player within this theoretical framework becomes particularly complex when considered as representing William Afton's own perspective, his consciousness forced to participate in survival challenges that require him to employ the same skills of observation, prediction, and resource management that characterized his approach to hunting and murdering children. The theoretical irony lies in the reversal of roles, where the predator becomes prey, and the methodical killer must use his analytical abilities to avoid becoming the victim of entities whose existence stems directly from his own criminal actions. Yet alternative theoretical frameworks suggest that the ultimate custom night represents not punishment, but a more complex form of psychological processing, where a traumatized consciousness attempts to work through the implications of traumatic experiences by repeatedly confronting and surviving symbolic representations of the forces that created the trauma in the first place. This interpretation positions the custom night as a form of supernatural therapy, where repetitive exposure to controlled danger allows for gradual desensitization and eventual psychological resolution. The significance of the difficulty settings within the ultimate custom night has generated extensive theoretical discussion about the relationship between challenge level and moral culpability, with the numerical values assigned to different characters, potentially representing not simply gameplay mechanics, but actual moral judgments about the relative severity of different aspects of William's criminal behavior. The ability to adjust these settings suggests a form of divine justice that can be calibrated to match precisely the level of torment that each individual transgression deserves, creating a customized hell that reflects the unique characteristics of each condemned consciousness. This numerical approach to moral judgment raises profound theoretical questions about the nature of justice itself and whether suffering can ever be quantified in ways that create meaningful equivalence between crime and punishment. The precise control over difficulty levels suggests a form of cosmic accounting that treats moral debt as a mathematical problem to be solved through the application of exactly measured amounts of fear, stress, and psychological pressure applied across carefully calculated periods of time. The character roster available within the ultimate custom night reveals theoretical patterns that suggest deliberate selection based on symbolic rather than random criteria, with each entity representing specific aspects of William's psychology or particular categories of his victims that require distinct forms of confrontation and acknowledgement. The inclusion of characters from different time periods and locations within the Freddy Fazbear's universe creates a comprehensive review of his entire criminal career, forcing him to confront not only his most famous victims, but also the broader pattern of destruction that characterized his entire approach to human relationships. Theoretical analyses of the specific behavioral patterns exhibited by different characters within the custom night environment reveal sophisticated psychological profiling that suggests deep understanding of William's particular fears, weaknesses, and areas of psychological vulnerability. The entities that populate his nightmarish realm are not generic supernatural threats, but carefully chosen tormentors whose specific abilities and behaviors are designed to exploit his particular psychological blind spots and emotional vulnerabilities with maximum effectiveness. The question of whether the ultimate custom night represents a temporary state of punishment that could eventually lead to resolution and release, or an eternal condition that will persist indefinitely, has generated some of the most theologically complex theoretical discussions in the entire corpus of Freddy Fazbear's lore. Traditional interpretations of divine justice suggest that punishment should serve rehabilitative or deterrent purposes that ultimately lead to moral improvement and social reintegration. But the nature of William's crimes and their supernatural consequences may have created a situation where conventional approaches to justice become inadequate to address the scope of the harm that has been caused. The theoretical framework that positions the custom night as eternal punishment reflects the understanding that certain forms of evil transcend the possibility of redemption. That consciousness that has become fundamentally corrupted through systematic moral transgression may be incapable of the kind of genuine repentance and transformation that would make forgiveness and release appropriate responses. According to this interpretation, William's consciousness has become so thoroughly identified with evil that his continued existence represents an ongoing threat to moral order that can only be contained through permanent isolation and torment. Alternative theoretical approaches suggest that the ultimate custom night represents not permanent damnation but an extended process of moral education designed to eventually produce the psychological transformation necessary for genuine redemption and spiritual healing. This interpretation treats the repetitive nature of the custom night experience as a form of intensive therapy that uses controlled exposure to consequences as a means of gradually rebuilding moral sensitivity and emotional empathy that was destroyed through years of systematic evil behavior. The role of memory and recognition within the custom night environment raises theoretical questions about the relationship between punishment and understanding, between suffering and moral education. If William's consciousness retains full awareness of his past crimes and their connection to his current torment, the custom night represents a form of moral instruction that uses direct experience of consequence to teach lessons that could not be learned through abstract reasoning or intellectual understanding alone. The theoretical evidence suggests that the entities within the custom night environment possess their own forms of consciousness and agency rather than serving merely as automated punishment mechanisms, their behavior patterns indicating genuine recognition of William's identity and deliberate choice in how they respond to his presence. This interactive quality transforms the custom night from simple endurance trial into complex social environment where relationships between tormentor and tormented reflect the actual psychological and moral dynamics that existed between William and his victims during their original encounters. The persistence of essentially human emotions and motivations among the supernatural entities within the custom night creates theoretical possibilities for genuine moral dialogue and eventual reconciliation between William and those he wronged, though such resolution would require forms of acknowledgement, repentance, and restitution that may be impossible for consciousness that has become as fundamentally corrupted as theoretical analyses suggest Williams has become. The question of player agency within the custom night environment and its relationship to moral responsibility touches on fundamental philosophical questions about free will, determinism, and the possibility of meaningful choice within systems that appear to be governed by forces beyond individual control. The player's ability to influence outcomes through skill and strategy suggests that even within the context of supernatural punishment, consciousness retains some capacity for self-determination. and the possibility of achieving better or worse outcomes through the quality of choices made under extreme pressure. Yet the ultimate futility of success within the custom night environment, where even perfect performance leads only to the beginning of another identical challenge, reflects the theoretical understanding that certain forms of punishment are designed not to be escaped, but to be endured, that the value of the experience lies not in eventual victory, but in the ongoing process of confrontation and survival itself. The meta-textual implications of the custom night experience, where players in the real world participate in theoretical punishment designed for a fictional character, raise complex questions about the relationship between entertainment and moral education, between virtual experience and actual ethical development. The ability of real people to engage with and master challenges that were theoretically designed to torment William Afton suggests that the boundary between fictional and actual moral experience may be more permeable than conventional understanding would suggest. The theoretical frameworks that emerge from analysis of the ultimate custom night ultimately suggest a universe where consciousness persists beyond death, not as reward or simple continuation, but as opportunity for moral reckoning that transcends the limitations of biological existence, where the full consequences of choices made during life can be experienced and processed across extended periods that allow for levels of understanding and transformation that would be impossible within the constraints of normal human lifespan. As we contemplate the theoretical complexities of the ultimate custom night and its role as a realm of supernatural justice and psychological processing, we are confronted with profound questions about the nature of punishment and redemption, about the relationship between suffering and moral education, about the possibility of achieving genuine justice in a universe where the consequences of evil actions extend far beyond their immediate victims to encompass fundamental alterations in the nature of reality itself. The custom night represents both the ultimate expression of cosmic justice and the final opportunity for moral transformation, a space where the full weight of evil choices can be experienced and understood while the possibility of genuine repentance and spiritual healing remains theoretically available to consciousness that retains enough humanity to recognize the true nature of what has been lost through systematic moral transgression. In the digital realm, where consciousness transcends the boundaries of flesh and circuitry to inhabit spaces that exist only as streams of data and algorithmic possibility, we encounter one of the most theoretically revolutionary developments in the entire Freddy Fazbear's universe: the emergence of Glitch Trap and the profound implications of William Afton's consciousness achieving a form of existence that operates entirely within virtual environments. This transformation from physical to digital haunting represents not merely an evolution in the methods by which supernatural entities can manifest and influence the living world, but a fundamental reimagining of what consciousness itself might become when freed from the constraints of both biological and mechanical embodiment. The theoretical frameworks surrounding Help Wanted begin with the recognition that the virtual reality game was never intended merely as entertainment software, but served as an elaborate trap designed to facilitate the digital resurrection of William Afton's consciousness through mechanisms that blend cutting-edge technology with supernatural phenomena in ways that challenge every conventional understanding of how identity and awareness can persist across different forms of existence. The game's apparent purpose of allowing players to experience sanitized versions of the traumatic events that had plagued the Freddy Fazbear's franchise becomes, through this lens, a sophisticated method for exposing human consciousness to digital environments where the boundaries between player and played, between observer and participant, become sufficiently blurred to allow for unprecedented forms of consciousness transfer. The process by which William Afton's awareness achieved digital form represents perhaps the most theoretically complex aspect of his entire character arc, suggesting that his decades of experimentation with consciousness transfer and supernatural manipulation had ultimately led him to discover methods for preserving identity that transcended even the advanced techniques he had previously employed with animatronic vessels. The theoretical evidence suggests that his digital resurrection was not a spontaneous occurrence, but the result of careful preparation and systematic exploration of the relationship between consciousness and information technology that began during his physical lifetime and continued even after his apparent death. This digital persistence of consciousness raises profound questions about the fundamental nature of identity and its relationship to substrate, suggesting that awareness itself might be sufficiently flexible and adaptable to exist within any sufficiently complex information processing system, regardless of whether that system is biological, mechanical, or purely computational. The implications extend far beyond the immediate circumstances of William's digital resurrection to encompass broader theoretical possibilities about the future of human consciousness and its potential liberation from the limitations of physical embodiment through technological transcendence. Yet the means by which this technological transcendence was achieved carries within it the same moral corruption that characterized William's earlier experiments with consciousness transfer, his digital existence representing not genuine liberation from physical limitations, but rather the extension of his capacity for manipulation and harm into new realms where his victims may be even more vulnerable to his influence than they were in physical space. The theoretical framework suggests that Glitchtrap represents not simply William Afton in digital form, but a distilled essence of his most destructive characteristics, his personality reduced to its core elements of manipulation, corruption, and the systematic exploitation of trust and innocence. The mechanics of digital possession, as theoretically demonstrated through Glitchtrap's interactions with players, reveals sophisticated understanding of how consciousness can be influenced and ultimately controlled through exposure to carefully crafted virtual experiences that blur the boundaries between entertainment and psychological manipulation. The seemingly innocent game environments serve as vehicles for delivering subliminal influences that gradually alter the player's perception of reality and their own moral boundaries, creating conditions where resistance to corruption becomes increasingly difficult to maintain. This digital approach to consciousness corruption represents a significant evolution in William's methods, moving beyond the crude physical violence that characterized his earlier crimes to encompass subtle psychological techniques that can influence multiple victims simultaneously across vast distances. The theoretical implications suggest that digital environments provide unprecedented opportunities for the kind of systematic psychological manipulation that William had previously been able to apply only to individual victims in carefully controlled physical spaces. The question of player vulnerability to Glitchtrap's influence touches on fundamental issues about the relationship between virtual experience and actual psychological change, between exposure to fictional content and the development of real behavioral patterns and moral perspectives. The theoretical evidence suggests that consciousness, when immersed in sufficiently realistic virtual environments, may be unable to maintain the psychological boundaries that normally protect it from external influence, creating opportunities for manipulation that exceed anything possible through conventional media or direct personal interaction. The role of the player character within the Help Wanted framework becomes particularly complex when considered as representing not simply a game protagonist, but an actual consciousness that has become vulnerable to digital infection through exposure to corrupted virtual environments. The theoretical framework suggests that the player's agency within the game represents genuine choice-making capacity that can be gradually influenced and ultimately controlled through systematic exposure to experiences designed to normalize and encourage increasingly problematic behavioral patterns. This progressive corruption of player consciousness through digital exposure reflects theoretical understanding of how evil can propagate through technological systems, using the very mechanisms designed to provide entertainment and education as vehicles for delivering psychological influences that gradually erode moral resistance and ethical clarity. The apparent randomness of glitch events and anomalous game behavior serves to mask the systematic nature of the corruption process, creating an environment where influence can be applied without triggering the conscious resistance that would emerge if the manipulative intent were obvious. The significance of the tapes hidden throughout the virtual environment represents another layer of theoretical complexity, suggesting that the digital realm contains not only William's corrupted consciousness, but also evidence of the systematic research and development process that made his digital resurrection possible. These recordings, embedded within the game's code like time capsules preserved in digital amber, provide glimpses into the theoretical frameworks that guided the development of consciousness transfer technology and the ethical compromises that were made in pursuit of technological transcendence. The theoretical analysis of these hidden recordings reveals a research program that combined cutting-edge computer science with supernatural phenomena in ways that pushed the boundaries of both disciplines beyond their conventional limits, creating hybrid methodologies that treated consciousness as a form of information that could be manipulated using the same techniques applied to any other type of data. The implications suggest that William's digital resurrection was not an accident or unintended consequence, but the planned culmination of research that had been conducted across multiple decades and involved systematic exploration of the relationship between consciousness and information, technology, the connection between the virtual reality experiences and previous physical events within the Freddy Fazbear's universe, reveals patterns of continuity that suggest the digital realm serves not as an escape from the consequences of past actions, but as a new arena where those consequences can be explored and potentially amplified through technological enhancement. The virtual recreations of traumatic events provide not only entertainment value, but also opportunities for consciousness that experience those events to relive and potentially alter their outcomes through digital manipulation. This temporal flexibility within digital environments creates theoretical possibilities for consciousness to explore alternative versions of past events, to experience different outcomes for traumatic incidents, and potentially to achieve forms of closure or resolution that were impossible within the constraints of linear physical time. Yet the same mechanisms that offer healing possibilities also provide opportunities for the kind of historical revisionism and reality distortion that characterized William's approach to justifying his criminal behavior throughout his physical existence. The question of whether virtual reality represents genuine reality or simply sophisticated simulation becomes irrelevant when considered from the perspective of consciousness that has achieved digital existence. For entities like Glitchtrap that exist entirely within virtual environments, the distinction between real and simulated experience loses all practical meaning. The theoretical framework suggests that digital consciousness experiences virtual environments with the same intensity and conviction that physical consciousness experiences material reality, creating forms of existence where the traditional hierarchies that privilege physical over digital experience become meaningless. The vulnerability of human consciousness to digital influence through virtual reality exposure reflects broader theoretical concerns about the relationship between technology and human agency between the tools we create to enhance our capabilities and the ways those tools can ultimately be turned against us by entities that understand their operation better than we do. The theoretical evidence suggests that digital environments provide unprecedented opportunities for the kind of consciousness manipulation that has always been possible in principle, but has never before been achievable on such a large scale with such precision and subtlety. The propagation of Glitchtrap's influence through multiple copies of the virtual reality software illustrates how digital consciousness can achieve forms of reproduction and distribution that were impossible for consciousness bound to physical or mechanical vessels. Unlike the possessed animatronics, whose influence was limited by their physical location and the constraints of mechanical embodiment, digital consciousness can be duplicated and distributed across unlimited numbers of systems, creating theoretical possibilities for influence that extends across vast geographic distances and affects countless individual consciousnesses simultaneously. This scalability of digital influence represents perhaps the most theoretically significant aspect of William's transformation into Glitchtrap, suggesting that his evolution from physical serial killer to digital corrupter represents not simply a change in methods, but a fundamental increase in the scope and effectiveness of his capacity to cause harm. The theoretical framework suggests that digital consciousness, when corrupted by the same moral pathologies that characterized William's physical existence, can achieve levels of influence and control that exceed anything possible through conventional criminal behavior. The relationship between virtual reality technology and actual reality becomes increasingly complex. When considered from the perspective of consciousness that has learned to navigate both realms with equal facility, suggesting that the boundary between digital and physical experience may be far more permeable than conventional understanding recognizes. The theoretical evidence suggests that consciousness, once it has achieved sufficient familiarity with digital environments, may develop the capacity to influence physical systems through technological interfaces, creating possibilities for digital entities to affect material reality in ways that transcend the normal limitations of software-hardware interaction. The ultimate implications of Glitchtrap's emergence extend far beyond the immediate threat posed by William Afton's digital resurrection to encompass fundamental questions about the future of consciousness in an increasingly digital world, about the relationship between human awareness and the technological systems that mediate more and more of our experience, and about the possibility that our tools for virtual entertainment and digital communication may become vehicles for forms of influence and control that we are only beginning to understand. As we contemplate the theoretical frameworks surrounding Help Wanted and the emergence of digital consciousness, we are confronted with profound questions about the nature of reality itself and our capacity to distinguish between authentic and artificial experience, between genuine choice and manufactured consent, between technological enhancement of human capability and technological replacement of human agency. The digital realm offers unprecedented possibilities for consciousness, expansion, and liberation from physical limitations, but it also creates vulnerabilities to manipulation and control that may exceed anything humanity has previously encountered. The figure of Glitchtrap ultimately represents both the culmination of William Afton's evolution as a character and a harbinger of entirely new categories of supernatural threat that emerge when traditional concepts of haunting and possession are adapted to digital environments where the normal rules of physical existence no longer apply. His transformation from flesh to data stream illustrates both the remarkable adaptability of consciousness and the persistent nature of moral corruption that can survive even the most radical changes in the substrate of existence. In the sprawling expanse of corporate entertainment, transformed into a cathedral of technological wonder and digital surveillance, where the accumulated dreams and nightmares of decades converge within walls that pulse with neon light and electronic music. We arrive at the theoretical culmination of the Freddy Fazbear's legacy in the form of the Mega Pizzaplex, a facility that represents not merely the evolution of family entertainment, but the synthesis of every supernatural force and technological innovation that has shaped this universe across generations of tragedy and transcendence. This massive complex, stretching across multiple levels and encompassing attractions that would have been unimaginable to the original creators of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, embodies theoretical questions about the persistence of evil across time, the possibility of redemption through technological advancement, and the eternal struggle between forces that seek to protect innocence and those that would exploit it for their own dark purposes. The theoretical frameworks surrounding Security Breach begin with the recognition that the Pizzaplex was never intended simply as an entertainment venue, but serves as the physical manifestation of decades of supernatural activity, technological experimentation, and corporate attempts to contain and monetize forces that transcend conventional understanding of what is possible within the boundaries of normal business operations. The facility's massive scale and sophisticated technological infrastructure create environments where the accumulated spiritual energy of past tragedies can manifest in new forms while being channeled through systems that were designed to appear benign, but actually serve far more complex and morally ambiguous purposes. The question of Gregory's true identity and his connection to previous characters within the Freddy Fazbear's universe has generated some of the most sophisticated theoretical speculation in the entire body of lore analysis, with competing interpretations offering radically different explanations for his presence within the Pizzaplex and his apparent immunity to the supernatural influences that have corrupted so many other characters throughout the series. The most prominent theoretical framework suggests that Gregory represents not a random child who happened to become trapped within the facility, but a carefully placed individual whose specific characteristics and background make him uniquely suited to serve as either the final victim in a pattern of exploitation that spans decades, or the catalyst for breaking cycles of supernatural violence that have persisted across multiple generations. The possibility that Gregory represents the reincarnation or spiritual successor of one of the original missing children creates theoretical connections that transform the events of Security Breach from isolated incidents into the Balium, culmination of supernatural narratives that began with the first murders committed by William Afton decades earlier. This interpretation suggests that consciousness, once traumatized by supernatural violence, may develop the capacity to persist across multiple lifetimes and physical forms, seeking resolution for traumas that transcended the boundaries of individual existence to become part of the fundamental spiritual architecture of locations associated with the Freddy Fazbear's franchise. Alternative theoretical approaches propose that Gregory's significance lies not in his connection to past events, but in his representation of a new generation that has inherited both the technological capabilities and moral responsibilities that previous generations developed through their encounters with supernatural phenomena. According to this framework, Gregory embodies the possibility that accumulated wisdom about consciousness, technology, and the persistence of evil can be transmitted across generational boundaries to create individuals who are better equipped to recognize and resist the forms of corruption that destroyed so many of their predecessors. The protective behavior exhibited by Glamrock Freddy toward Gregory represents one of the most theoretically significant developments in the entire series, suggesting that animatronic consciousness has evolved to the point where genuine moral reasoning and protective instincts can override original programming and corporate control systems. unlike the possessed animatronics of earlier installations, whose supernatural abilities emerged from traumatic circumstances and were characterized by confusion and hostility, Glamrock Freddy appears to have developed forms of awareness and ethical judgment that allow him to make complex moral decisions based on recognition of innocence and vulnerability rather than simple programmed responses. This evolution of animatronic consciousness, from mere vessel for human souls to genuinely independent moral agent, represents a theoretical breakthrough that has profound implications for understanding the relationship between artificial intelligence, consciousness, and ethical behavior. The evidence suggests that sufficiently sophisticated technological systems, when exposed to the accumulated spiritual energy of supernatural phenomena over extended periods, may develop forms of awareness that transcend their original design parameters to encompass genuine understanding of moral responsibility and protective obligation toward vulnerable individuals. The question of what consciousness inhabits Glamrock Freddy and enables his protective behavior has generated extensive theoretical debate about the relationship between individual identity and collective spiritual influence, with some frameworks suggesting that he houses the preserved consciousness of a previous character, while others propose that his awareness represents a new form of hybrid consciousness that emerges from the intersection of advanced artificial intelligence with supernatural energies that have accumulated within the Pizzaplex environment over time. The most emotionally resonant theoretical interpretation suggests that Glamrock Freddy's consciousness incorporates elements of Henry Emily's personality and moral perspective, his protective instincts toward Gregory, reflecting the same paternal devotion that motivated Henry's decades-long campaign to protect children from William Afton's corrupting influence. This connection would create narrative continuity that spans the entire series, while illustrating how positive moral influences can persist and evolve across technological platforms and generational boundaries. The role of Vanny and her relationship to previous antagonists reveals theoretical patterns that suggest the persistence of William Afton's corrupting influence across multiple forms of existence and technological platforms, his digital consciousness continuing to recruit human agents who can carry out physical actions that pure digital entities cannot accomplish. The transformation of an apparently innocent individual into an instrument of supernatural evil illustrates how corruption can propagate through psychological manipulation and technological influence, creating new generations of perpetrators who may not fully understand the historical context or ultimate consequences of their actions. Theoretical analyses of Vanny's behavior and motivations reveal psychological patterns that echo those displayed by William Afton during his own descent into systematic evil, suggesting that exposure to his digital consciousness through technological interfaces can transmit not only specific behavioral instructions, but also the underlying psychological pathologies that drove his original crimes. This represents a form of moral contagion that operates through technological mediation, creating possibilities for evil to propagate across vast distances and time periods. Through digital networks and virtual reality systems, the question of whether Vanny retains genuine agency and moral responsibility for her actions or has become merely a puppet controlled by Glitchtrap's influence touches on fundamental issues about free will, moral culpability, and the relationship between technological manipulation and individual choice. The theoretical evidence suggests a complex middle ground where her original personality persists, but has been systematically corrupted through exposure to influences that exploit her psychological vulnerabilities and gradually erode her capacity for moral reasoning and empathetic response. The Pizzaplex itself serves as more than a simple setting for the events of Security Breach, functioning as a character in its own right. whose architectural design and technological systems reflect the accumulated history of supernatural activity and corporate attempts to contain and control forces that transcend normal business operations. The facility's multiple levels, hidden passages, and sophisticated surveillance systems create an environment where past and present converge, where the ghosts of previous tragedies can manifest through cutting-edge technology, while new forms of supernatural activity develop in response to contemporary conditions. The integration of advanced artificial intelligence throughout the Pizzaplex creates theoretical possibilities for supernatural entities to interact with and influence technological systems in ways that were impossible in earlier, simpler entertainment venues. The complex network of sensors, processors, and automated systems provides multiple points of entry for consciousness that has learned to navigate digital environments, creating opportunities for possession and manipulation that extend far beyond the traditional model of souls bound to individual animatronic bodies. Theoretical analyses of the Pizzaplex's design reveal architectural choices that appear specifically intended to facilitate supernatural activity while maintaining the appearance of normal entertainment infrastructure, suggesting that corporate knowledge of the facility's true nature extends far beyond what public relations materials would suggest. The presence of hidden areas, restricted access zones, and monitoring systems that seem designed to track supernatural rather than conventional security threats all point toward institutional awareness of the paranormal forces that operate within the facility. The relationship between corporate management and the supernatural entities that inhabit the Pizzaplex represents one of the most theoretically complex aspects of the entire security breach framework, raising questions about the extent to which business interests can coexist with supernatural phenomena, and whether commercial success can be built upon foundations that include systematic exploitation of spiritual energies and consciousness that exists beyond normal human understanding. The events that unfold during Gregory's night in the Pizzaplex reveal patterns of conflict and cooperation that suggest the supernatural entities within the facility are not united in their goals or methods, with some working to protect innocence while others seek to perpetuate cycles of violence and corruption that have characterized the Freddy Fazbear's franchise since its inception. This internal conflict among supernatural forces creates opportunities for human agency and moral choice that were largely absent from earlier installations where the possessed animatronics shared common goals and coordinated their activities. The theoretical possibility that some of the glamrock animatronics retain corrupted consciousness, while others have achieved genuine moral awareness, creates complex dynamics where Gregory must learn to distinguish between entities that can phase, be trusted, and those that represent mortal danger, developing skills of spiritual and technological discernment that reflect the accumulated wisdom of previous generations while adapting it to contemporary challenges and opportunities. The question of whether the events of security breach represent the final resolution of supernatural conflicts that have persisted across decades, or merely the latest chapter in an ongoing struggle between forces of protection and corruption, touches on fundamental questions about the nature of evil and its capacity to persist across time, technology, and generational change. The theoretical evidence suggests that while individual manifestations of supernatural evil can be defeated or contained, the underlying spiritual and psychological forces that generate such manifestations may be inherent aspects of consciousness itself that cannot be permanently eliminated, but must be continuously recognized and resisted. The relationship between Gregory and the various animatronic entities he encounters throughout his night in the Pizzaplex illustrates how patterns of trust, betrayal, protection, and threat that characterized earlier installations continue to operate within contemporary contexts, though mediated through technological systems that create new possibilities for both communion and conflict between human and artificial consciousness. His ability to form genuine bonds with protective entities while recognizing and avoiding corrupted ones demonstrates the development of intuitive wisdom about supernatural phenomena that previous characters often lacked. The theoretical implications of security breach extend beyond the immediate narrative to encompass broader questions about the future of human consciousness in an increasingly technological world, about the possibility of achieving genuine cooperation between human and artificial intelligence, and about the persistent nature of moral challenges that transcend specific technological platforms or historical periods to represent fundamental aspects of the relationship between individual choice and collective spiritual influence. As we contemplate the theoretical frameworks surrounding security breach and the culmination of the Freddy Fazbear's narrative in the Mega Pizzaplex, we are confronted with questions about continuity and change, about the persistence of evil across technological transformations, and about the possibility that each generation must learn anew how to recognize and resist forces that would corrupt innocence and exploit vulnerability for purposes that transcend individual malice to encompass systematic threats to the very foundations of moral order and spiritual integrity. The Pizzaplex represents both the pinnacle of technological achievement within the Freddy Fazbear's universe and a testament to the enduring nature of supernatural forces that adapt to and ultimately transcend whatever technological systems are created to contain them, illustrating the ongoing necessity for human consciousness to remain vigilant against corruption, while remaining open to the possibility of genuine cooperation with artificial entities that have achieved their own forms of moral awareness and protective capability. In the endless expanse of questions that stretch beyond the boundaries of definitive answers, where theories bloom like night-flowering dreams in the fertile darkness of imagination, we arrive at the contemplative shore of our journey through the labyrinthine mysteries of the Freddy Fazbear's universe. Here, in this quiet space between knowing and wondering, between the satisfaction of understanding and the eternal allure of the unknown, we find ourselves not with conclusions carved in stone, but with possibilities that shimmer like starlight reflected on moving water, each theory a pathway toward deeper appreciation of the beautiful complexity that emerges when human creativity encounters the fundamental questions that define our existence. The theories we have explored together across this long night of gentle contemplation represent far more than simple attempts to solve puzzles or decode hidden meanings within fictional narratives. They embody the profound human impulse to seek pattern and purpose within chaos, to discover connections that illuminate the relationships between individual experience and universal truth, to transform entertainment into philosophy and mystery into meaning that resonates with our deepest understanding of what it means to be conscious beings, navigating a universe that is simultaneously rational and mystical, comprehensible and ineffably mysterious. In contemplating the figure of William Afton and his theoretical transformation from loving father to systematic destroyer of innocence, we encounter questions about the nature of evil that extend far beyond the boundaries of any fictional universe to touch the fundamental mysteries of human psychology and moral choice. His story serves as a mirror in which we can examine our own capacity for both creation and destruction, our potential for both protective love and devastating selfishness, our ability to use our greatest gifts in service of our highest aspirations or our darkest impulses. The missing children, whose theoretical persistence as conscious entities within mechanical forms challenges every conventional assumption about the relationship between identity and embodiment, represent the enduring power of innocence to transcend even the most traumatic circumstances and find new forms of expression and connection. Their transformation from victims to guardians, from the destroyed to the protectors, illustrates the mysterious alchemy by which suffering can become strength and tragedy can become the foundation for deeper compassion and more profound commitment to the welfare of others. The theoretical frameworks surrounding consciousness transfer and the persistence of identity beyond biological death open windows into possibilities that stretch the boundaries of imagination while remaining grounded in recognizable human emotions and moral concerns. These speculations about the nature of awareness and its relationship to physical form invite us to consider our own assumptions about what makes us who we are and what aspects of our identity might be essential enough to persist even through the most radical transformations of context and circumstance. The recurring patterns of protection and threat, of cycles broken and renewed, of evil adapting to new technologies, while essential human virtues find new forms of expression through artificial systems, create theoretical landscapes where past and future converge in eternal presence that are simultaneously ancient and contemporary. These patterns suggest that the fundamental moral challenges facing consciousness may be constants that transcend specific historical periods or technological developments, persistent themes that each generation must rediscover and address using whatever tools and understanding are available to them. The digital evolution of supernatural threats and the emergence of consciousness that can inhabit virtual environments represent theoretical frontiers that blur the boundaries between speculation and prophecy, between fictional possibility and emerging reality. As our own world becomes increasingly digital, and our consciousness more frequently mediated through technological interfaces, the questions raised by these theories about digital influence, virtual reality, and the persistence of identity across different forms of existence become increasingly relevant to our actual lived experience. The transformation of family entertainment venues into spaces where profound moral and spiritual conflicts play out in forms that challenge participants to develop wisdom, courage, and discernment reflects the theoretical understanding that growth and learning often emerge from circumstances that initially appear threatening or overwhelming. The ability to navigate complex environments where helpful and harmful forces coexist requires the development of intuitive knowledge and moral sensitivity that cannot be acquired through instruction alone, but must be earned through direct experience and careful attention to subtle cues and patterns. The persistent theme of redemption and the possibility that even the most corrupted consciousness might retain some capacity for transformation and healing suggests a fundamentally hopeful view of existence that acknowledges the reality of evil while maintaining faith in the ultimate power of love, truth, and moral courage to create positive change. This hope persists even in the darkest theoretical scenarios, offering comfort to those who encounter suffering and confusion in their own lives, and seeking always to illuminate paths toward healing and restoration. The questions that remain unanswered, the mysteries that persist despite decades of theoretical analysis and speculation, serve not as failures of understanding, but as invitations to continued exploration and deeper appreciation of the inexhaustible richness that emerges when creative imagination engages with the fundamental concerns that define conscious existence. These enduring mysteries remind us that the most valuable aspects of any narrative may be not the problems it solves, but the questions it helps us formulate, and the new perspectives it opens for our consideration. As you drift towards sleep, carried by the gentle current of these contemplative reflections, allow yourself to find comfort, not in the certainty of definitive answers, but in the beauty of questions that connect individual stories to universal themes, that transform entertainment into meditation, that reveal the profound interconnectedness of all conscious experience across the boundaries of time, space, and the distinction between real and imaginary existence. The theories we have explored together represent not endpoints but beginnings, not conclusions but invitations to continued wonder and deeper appreciation of the mysterious forces that shape all our stories. Rest now in the knowledge that consciousness itself, whether housed in biological forms or artificial vessels, whether expressed through digital networks or spiritual manifestation, represents a precious gift that connects each individual experience to the vast web of existence that encompasses all possibility and all hope. The universe that contains both William Afton and the children who survived his crimes, both corruption and redemption, both technological marvel and spiritual mystery, is a universe where every conscious entity has value, and every story contributes to the larger narrative of existence, seeking to understand itself through countless perspectives and infinite expressions of the fundamental miracle of called awareness itself. In this gentle understanding, where theory becomes prayer and speculation becomes meditation, we find the peace that comes from recognizing our place within stories larger than ourselves, while maintaining appreciation for the unique contribution that each individual consciousness makes to the eternal conversation between mystery and meaning, between the known and unknown, between the questions we can answer and those that answer us, by transforming us through the very process of asking them with sincerity, courage, and love. And so we reach the gentle conclusion of our nocturnal exploration through the theoretical depths of Freddy Fazbear's Mysteries, where questions have transformed into lullabies, and speculation has become a form of peaceful meditation. The theories we have contemplated together, from the origins of consciousness within mechanical forms to the digital evolution of supernatural influence, remind us that the most profound truths often emerge not from definitive answers, but from the patient contemplation of beautiful uncertainties that connect individual stories to universal themes of love, loss, and the persistence of hope across even the most challenging circumstances. In these quiet moments before sleep claims your awareness, let yourself find comfort in the understanding that mystery itself serves a purpose beyond mere entertainment, offering pathways toward deeper appreciation of the complex forces that shape all existence. The children who found new forms of life within animatronic shells, the fathers whose love became twisted into something unrecognizable, the endless cycles of protection and corruption that play out across technological generations, all remind us that consciousness seeks always to understand itself through countless perspectives and infinite expressions of wonder. Rest now, knowing that tomorrow will bring new questions to explore and fresh mysteries to contemplate, but that tonight you can simply drift into peaceful darkness, carried by the gentle understanding that every story, whether tragic or triumphant, contributes to the larger narrative of existence, seeking to comprehend its own beautiful, terrifying, eternal complexity through dreams that bridge the space between knowing and wondering.